Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Coop Chicks in Charge podcast. We are continuing today with our Read and Lead book club series. This is actually the 10th book today that we're talking about. We read a new personal development book every 2 months, and I invite in a boss chick who has said that this particular book has been especially impactful in their lives to share their stories about it. And so today I have in the coop Carla Wilkins, who is a beauty CEO with Rodan and Fields, and she's also been a longtime friend of mine. Welcome to the podcast, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so today's book is Be Your Future Self Now. So tell us, what was it that made you love this book so much, and why we believe all the listeners out there should get this book immediately?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me that question. And it's like, I'm not sure I can boil it down to one thing. I think that I love the concept, and I believe wholeheartedly in the concept that the more clear and defined your future self is, that kind of pulls you to the future. So the book really talks about that for so many years we were focused on things in the past, like up until the 90s or whatever. The philosophy was that, we were driven by our past, and our past defines everything we do. And really, they've discovered in the last 30 years and multiple philosophers and writers that the more visionary we are and more clear-cut we are in our future, we're to be pulled to our future versus, living in our past. And so that is very true. And there's so many times in this book that I was just like, oh my gosh, that's so true. I had that. That's exactly how it worked. And you can look back into your life and see, when you say, okay, I accomplished this, or I accomplished this, whether it even high school, or you tried out for cheerleader, or you went on and did something in your work, or you changed careers, or you went through something personal and overcame, or you became a mother, right? It's all the things that drove you to the future and how you would define what your children, like the environment your children would grow up in versus living, in your past. I mean, obviously we have to learn from our past, and sometimes our past cripples us sometimes, but I don't know, so much of this book. And then I love how he breaks it down into steps and then gives you clear-cut actions toward the end, and they're all very doable, and just getting hyper-focused on where you want to be. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant too. Totally agree with you. And the way that he broke the book down is he starts with your future self threats, then he goes into future self truths, and then he ends with steps. So I like that this book is very actionable. And like he says, your future self is not set in stone. So it's the actions that we take today that are going to get us to where we want to be. So to ask ourselves, where do we want to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and start living that now to set ourselves up for success for that. So let's kind of break down each section of the book then, starting with the future self threats. What were some of the key takeaways for you in that section?
Well, I kind of think you have to go back to a little bit of his intro before we even get. What I love about the book is he starts out like he had me at hello. Like when he shared, and I think a lot of our viewers or listeners can relate to that. He shared, being caught up in the day-to-day and his work, and how, you show up and you're frustrated with the kids and all the things, and then, you're frustrated with the kids' toys and all of that. And he said, when I was writing this book, I applied my life to what it would be like 20 years later or 10 years later. And looking back, when my 3-year-old jumped on my lap, I mean, would I be that grumpy person thinking, okay, I've got to get in here, I've got to get my clothes off, would I, whatever, how would I critique myself? And is that the energy that how would my energy affect how she grew up and things like that? And so for being a mom, that's very powerful, because that just made me start crying, because it is the things that we do. And then if, we've all seen, what is it? The Grinch movie or whatever. What is the movie where he takes you back? The Christmas. What is that movie? The Christmas.
Yeah, Scrooge.
You Scrooge. Yes. And he takes you back and you see the situations and you think, I didn't see. So I loved how he set that up for you, because then you're open-minded with your heart to really make the change. And I don't think we really make any changes or move forward, or all this personal development doesn't really matter if our heart's not there with it. So I don't know. We can get to the meat of it. I just think the opening of this book, it really, it just made me cry.
Yeah, it grabs you. Well, yeah, and to put ourselves in the shoes of Scrooge, to say, because we're all going to go through that, and to say, how did I get to where I got at the end of my life, and can I be proud of it? Last week we talked about 4,000 weeks with Carrie King, and if you get to those to 80 years, if you're looking back on that, a lot of people don't end up saying, I wish I'd worked more. But yet in our society, that is what we feel like everyone is, rewarded for, and kind of expected, that you're just going to work hard and achieve and all this. And so I love that kind of those two books together are great, because when you get to the end of it, did you do what he's saying in this book, really living toward getting all of your goals done and appreciating that? And so, yeah, that's absolutely true.
Well, he talks about it's easier for us to look back. Like he asked, hey, the last 10 years, when you look back, what are the changes your life has made in 10 years? And of course you could start naming off all the, like you and I are both remarried, and like all the crazy, right? Most people can name off a ton of things that they've done, but then they say when they look into the future, they don't really say they'll change that much, because they don't have enough vision to get there. Yeah. So it's really powerful to put it in that perspective. So as we go into looking at the categories, for me, then I can look at it from a perspective, okay, wait a minute, because I can look back, because obviously we can look back. And so then I can look back and then start to kind of, he says, start with the end in mind. So if I look back in 10 years, what do I want that to look like? Now I can go back and build from there. So for me, we just lack vision. And so that really kind of put it in perspective, that I can go back and now analyze it and change.
Well, and you and I are both at that nester, with my youngest graduating in May. And so it is at these points in our life that we look back, because then we go, oh, like how was their childhood? How was I as a parent? Like, what would I have done differently? And I know for myself, I'm really happy that I had a very flexible work life and was able to be there for the kids. And because of things like, our technology and all this, we're still able to stay connected and be employed, and which is just a beautiful thing, because for a lot of history, women weren't able to do that. If they wanted to work, they were literally gone somewhere and not able to be with the children. So there are things like that, and why I think Dr. Hardy's book is so important, is to look at that and say, okay, well, I know in that part of my life. So now you and I are sitting there going, okay, then what do I want my next phase of life to be?
Yeah, and how can I make an impact?
Yeah. Okay, so let's dig into the future self threats then. Let's see here. He breaks it down into several sections. So I'm going to just kind of go over the threats to your future self. Threat number 1, without hope in your future, your present loses meaning. So really emphasizing that you've got to have hope there. Threat 2, a reactive narrative about your past stunts your future. So really the importance of letting go there. Threat number 3, being unaware of your environment creates a random evolution. And wow, I thought that was really important, because just understanding the reality of the present moment and where we are. Threat number 4, being disconnected from your future self leads to myopic decision. Threat number 5 was urgent battles and small goals keep you stuck, which I'll have to say that's one I want to go back on, because that was a biggie for me. And threat number 6, not being in the arena is failing by default. And then the 7th one, the final one in this section, success is often the catalyst for failure. So are there any of those that spoke the most to you that you would like to deep dive in?
Well, I think we all fall into most of those. I mean, we can look at different times in our lives. Yeah, and at different times where we've pivoted. So, and then part of the reason I got so choked up is the whole the first one, lack of hope and a clear sense of purpose for your future. So, Malena and I have been friends for a long time. In fact, we met back in the advertising world in our previous, and Melena's still kind of in this. Yeah. And so I actually became a widow like 8 years ago. And I can look back at the times when I actually built my business, and then also trying to get through that very sudden loss and raising daughters that were in high school and an only parent, and that whole lack of hope. And so I was recently talking to a new widow, and she was asking for, some advice. And I said, listen, I can tell you some things that helped me, but I can tell you there was a defining, because I am remarried now. And even though we leave a lot of space for what was, I try very hard to move forward and to, know that my time's not done. So, but that lack of hope, I remember very specifically at like the 6 to 8 month mark, I was having a major breakdown, and he was actually my partner in business. So I had retired him and he was working with me. So, we spent a lot of time together. Mm-hmm. And I just remember proclaiming that I will refuse to live in a world without hope. And if there's no hope for a better life or happiness, then I'm not signing up. So I am defining hope and I'm moving forward. So when he talked about lack of hope, you do feel hopeless when you go through really traumatic things in your life. And you just have to declare, and I think it's a big deal being an empty nester. We joke about it, but I find it extremely emotional and hard. And so, but by looking back, what do I want the next 10 years? Do I want to have created special memories and special connections? Do I want to move forward in my business? So I think the hope and a sense of purpose is extremely important. And I know we've been through a lot in the last 3 years as a world. And so we forgot to, hope, define our hope. And then, like unresolved trauma and pain from our past. So sometimes we just got to put it in a box. It doesn't mean we don't pull it out and cry over it sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. And you didn't have the easiest childhood. Like we all have past stuff. But if we live there forever, we don't move forward. And then we wake up. And that's the other thing. I said, well, I'm not going to wake up in 5 years and have wasted 5 years of my life staying in place, because what if that's the only 5 years I have? And I remember that distinctly. And so things like that define the direction we go. And so,
and what's so fascinating is, we don't realize that whatever we're thinking is the reality that we're living in, and that
we bring about.
Yeah, our bodies are physiologically still feeling whatever it is that is in our head. So if we're still back in that space of sadness, anger, grief, yes, it's okay to visit there sometimes, but yeah, to stay there is just so unhealthy, and that's just so unfortunate. And so really important. I love that you shared your story there on that one. So what else, what are some of those other threats there that really resonated with you?
Well, a biggie for me, honestly, is complacency, or overly, defined by our past successes, because I really reached a place where I was able to start my business in part-time hours, and then was able to leave my full-time corporate job when I replaced my income and bring my husband home. And I've been a business owner now, working for myself for 10 years. My business has been extremely successful. And I've become complacent, and I'm not okay with complacency. So, and when he talks about that, I was like, oh goodness. Because
Red alert.
You're on autopilot. And so we can't ever stop recreating and becoming. We're not serving the world by just sitting back. And when the more we sit back, the more timid we become. And, how are you supposed to pull other people up and help them move forward if you're sitting back just being less than you're capable of. So
Right.
that whole success-itis. And my new husband always says, honey, it's easy to grow from a place of desperation. It's hard to grow from a place of more comfort. That's,
Yes.
and you know what? We don't grow if we don't have extreme vision. And if we're, listen, what is it? Tony Robbins says, if we're not growing, we're dying.
Yeah.
So to actually think as a human that I could be in a better place in 10 years by being complacent, whether it's my health, my relationships, anything, is ridiculous.
Right.
So you can't be that way, but that happens because sometimes we just want to rest, and then sometimes the rest turns into laziness.
I have been guilty of that for sure.
For sure. We all have.
Yeah. I loved meaning like I hated that I resonated so much with threat number 5, urgent battles and small goals keep
For
you
sure.
trapped. Because we get, especially as women and as moms,
Squirrels
everywhere. We get so sidetracked. And then of course, if that's kind of our personality too, I love novelty and change and all that. And so I feel like every day I'm battling to stay on course. But what does keep me excited is to create a new goal, because I found that I'm less distracted if I make sure that I'm leveling up, not necessarily a new goal as in it's different than like this says, you don't want to go off course, like still go toward your goal. But making that a little bit bigger has helped me on that. But yeah, getting pulled away from all the small stuff. And then at the end of the day, you're like, what did I do? I didn't get the 3 big things that I marked in my plan and were my priority because I got distracted. I let myself get distracted. And he has a lot of great tips in the book about how to help yourself, so I thought that was really good too.
Well, I remember, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. No, that reminded me of him sharing the story, which I've heard a zillion times, but it's been a long time since I've heard it. The Stephen Covey story about, the rocks and the pebbles. And if you put the pebbles in, then you can't fit the big rocks in. And so you dump it all out. You put the 3 big, whatever, in his case, he's saying these 3 pillars, the 3 big rocks that are most important, and all the other stuff falls in between. And then it all fits. And which is, in a jar, which is your life. But oh my gosh, that's so right. I can't put all the little things first because I can't, if it's family, faith, whatever they are for people that can't go in. I was like, oh, I forgot about that story. It's a good story.
That is a very good story. Yeah. Well, so then the second part of the book, he talks about the 7 truths about our future self. And so these are like, how can we set ourselves up for success? And he says, truth number 1, your future drives your present. So yeah, that's going to dictate what we're going to do today to get to that future. Truth number 2, your future self is different than you expect. He talks about how we can never really predict the future. Just like we talked about, we don't know like how long a relationship's going to last, how long a job's going to last. If people are shocked, sometimes they end up going through 2 or 3 different careers. They think that the first one they're in is going to be there forever. And so we're really, really bad about predicting the future. Your future self is the Pied Piper. Truth number 4, the more vivid and detailed your future self, the faster you'll progress. So getting really, really specific. Truth number 5, failing as your future self is better than succeeding as your current self. That's a big one. Truth number 6, success is achieved by being true to your future self, nothing else. And number 7, your view of God impacts your future self. So those are all real biggies there. Which one of those would you say was the biggest for you?
Well, the future self is the Pied Piper, and his story about the Pied Piper, and you will always pay the Pied Piper. And basically, who knew that the story of the Pied Piper is actually, all the little sayings we say and we grew up with all came from something.
Right.
There was a Pied Piper, and what was it that he had? I think he helped some town or something with something, and then the town refused to pay him, and so then he took some, anyway, basically whatever you do is a compounding effect, and you will always pay the Pied Piper, or life will, in other words, your health or whatever. Don't take care of your health, and then you'll have problems in the future. It will catch up with you. Don't take care of your finances. Eventually, you gamble, or you drink too much, or you play around, you make too many. I mean, how many times in our 20s, I always joke that in my 20s, when a lot of my other friends were still going to bars, because I lost my mom at 23, and I basically found myself right out of college just completely financially responsible for myself. I would not go out on Thursday nights. I ended up in a commissioned radio sales job, and I was a little bit embarrassed by it, honestly. I kept telling my friends, well, if I fail, I'm just going to go. Or I said, I'm not sure this is what I want to do, but I may go get back and get my master's, because I was a journalism major like you were. And so, but what I realized is, if I wanted to make any money, like Fridays, if I had big clients or whatever, that I learned really early that I need sleep. I don't function real well. I'm not at my best. I don't take negative news well if I'm tired. And so I wouldn't, after a few times of blowing meetings on Fridays, or just coming in and just blowing off the day and just doing nothing, I realized, okay, your behavior affects your outcome, right?
Yes.
So you pay the Pied Piper. So absolutely, whatever we do, whether it's the activity, making the phone calls, doing the work, it eventually comes out. And you can't have that tipping point if you don't do the work. So paying the Pied Piper, because I'm really trying to work on my health journey. And that is, all our little bad habits add up.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's what I love when we do all of our books, we end up saying, oh, that reminds me of this from the last book. And so habits, we do talk a lot in our group about habits, because we all have them and we know how to work on them, but it's the consistency and sticking with it. And that commitment and discipline can be so hard. And I'm in the same boat. So that's why I love when he says on truth number 4, the more vivid and detailed your future self, the faster you'll progress. Because instead of saying some general thing like, oh, I want to be healthy. Well, what exactly do you mean by that? Because whatever that is going to dictate what actions I need to take today, the vitamins, the nutrition, the type of exercise, and then to be able to get there, because then we can turn it into something real that we can do today. And so I know for my future self, I'm thinking so many things about, growing Chicks in Charge, and which is exciting to me, because now that I'm at that point in my life as an empty nester where I'm not going to feel like I have to be so tied down, I would be able to travel a little bit more easily. And I love meeting new people. So thinking about the cities that I still want to visit and all of that. And it's just very exciting. And then personally with my health goals, same thing. Like you and I have talked about this in our group, like we're of the age where we have to take care of our hormones. And that's something that I had put off. And but to be really specific on all the ways that I want to feel, you mentioned sleep. I mean, my goodness, I just feel like I'm a wreck if I don't get at least 7.5 hours. And so then you sit there and go, what does that mean? It means that I can't stay up late. I can't drink too close to bedtime alcohol, because I'll probably wake up in the night, which then will mean I'm going to be grumpy the next day and all that. So yeah, Pied Piper, being super detailed, all those are so good. And then in the last part of the book, then this is why I appreciate some authors don't really tell you what to do after, they just put up all these scenarios. But for him, he really has the 7 steps for being your future self. Clarifying your contextual purpose, eliminating lesser goals. That's so important, because I know I like to achieve sometimes a small goal to make myself feel good. And I'm like, okay, well, you could have spent that time working on the bigger goal. Step number 3, elevate from needing to wanting to knowing, and ask for exactly what you want. So that's again about the clarity. Step 5, automate and systemize your future self. Step 6, schedule your future self. Step 7, aggressively complete imperfect work. Okay. Have you been, so we read this, what, last month, the last 2 months. Which of those steps have you been working on in your personal life? Would you share an example with us?
Oh boy. Really trying to clarify. I really appreciated him talking about, like, what was he said about 80% of your current self is beyond anything your former self could ever do. 80% of your future self will be beyond anything your current self could do. So, it's a whole analysis by paralysis, or over complicating, or, you stay in the learning phase versus the doing phase. And the doing phase requires messy. And there's really nothing in our lives that we've achieved anything level of success that it's not messy, business, health, whatever. You've got to be imperfect before you can be better, and then be perfect. And when you're trying to level up, you've got to be imperfect again. And I think that becomes harder and harder. It says new research and thinking, we are pulled toward our future. And so anyway, for me, I've just been working on being okay with being a novice again, of being, I've gone back. I'll give you an example of, so I started with my skincare company 12 years ago, and I didn't know anything about skin. And there were a lot of things I had to learn. I didn't know much about, like, building a team or anything like that. I didn't know about marketing and advertising and working with clients and helping them grow their businesses. So in some ways it correlated, but I didn't see that it correlated. But there was a lot of things you'd get questions with, you didn't know, or someone might use our regimen that evens your skin tone, and maybe they over scrubbed, and, oh, this product doesn't work. And I didn't know to say, oh, well, you might have scrubbed too hard, like all the little nuances. I know, and I didn't have that depth of confidence. So I feel like we burned through a little bit of customers, and of course they come back because the products work, but it really shakes you. You're nervous, and oh my, you hang on to every little excuse. So we've now entered into the hair care category. And I was just telling my team the other day, we're learning, it's like you take a scalp up approach with hair, which I was never taught. I mean, that your scalp's your skin and all that kind of stuff. So we're kind of re-educating people on their hair, and people can, same kind of concept. And so it's coming. So I have a thread with my team, and they were throwing out some problems, and they were going down the whole, and as I read it, I get a little like heartbeat rate. Oh my God, what if it doesn't work? What if this, what if that? And finally I was like, okay, wait a minute here. We just don't know how to troubleshoot yet. We don't know. So, I had to come back and reframe it and say, well, is this person doing this? And is this person doing this? I'm understanding that this. And I was like, you can't just twist off. And so for me, it's just focusing on the future self and what I can create, and not letting all the little nuances. And I see that when you work with a whole group of people, you see how the tendency to go down rabbit holes are. And you're like, how do you keep people focused on the greater? In fact, I'm going to do a book. I was telling you, I'm going to do a book club with my team, because you've just got to be honed in on what you want. And like, I have a new weight loss coach, and he's always like, he'll say, why do you want to lose weight? Well, I want to, I want to be this weight. So, okay, why do you want to be that weight? Well, so I can, and he's, that's not a good enough answer. He just keeps drilling on me. And I'm like, you're so harsh. And finally I made some.
He wants you to be specific.
Yes. And he keeps, and I'm just like, oh, I'm paying you for this. And so he finally, I mentioned that we had a boat and up at Grand, and that, I said, well, I feel a little self-conscious. I really like to wear shorts and feel more, because, oh, you want to be boat babe. And I was like, okay. So every time.
Hashtag boat babe. I love it.
Exactly.
Do that on Instagram.
Yes. Because I always tell people, like, if I'm working with business owners or whatever, which, my team, they'll say, oh, I want to make this. Well, why do you want to make this? So I can whatever. Well, that's not good enough. How are you going to? So I always laugh when David pulls the same techniques on me, but it's not, you want to build your business. you need to make money, right? But
Yeah.
you have to make money. And the more money you make might allow you to open more chicks and charges, all the things. But then all the things creates the life and the purpose and the vision and the hope and the passion. It's not the money, but we as women get so caught up on feeling guilty that it is the money, because the money creates the life and allows us to do more things. But anyway, I just loved how David got to, it's not the scale, it's the boat, but it's the feeling confident. I mean, like for Wade, it's the feeling confident. I don't have to look like skinny mini perfection, but I do want to feel good about myself. And it also represents the person that I see myself as, which is someone that's more disciplined than I am. So I don't know. He's really been good at what are the areas? So what are the areas for improvement, or what's the takeaway from this? And I'm always like, oh, shut up.
Right.
But it's so true. So I just love how he gets back down to, the things and the 80% completion, because we think it has to be perfect. And success and growth is messy. Life is messy, and we'll never get from A to G if it's not, we don't let it get messy. And once it gets messy, we use that as an excuse to quit or to say, I'm not going in the right way. And we all do it. It's pathetic. But I just loved how he really talks about, what was the word he used? What was the word he used about, I never heard it that way. It was, you had it on something.
Well, he says on that, aggressively complete imperfect work.
Yes. And he used it he used a funny word, and I thought I'd never heard it used that way. Shipping. It's shipping.
Seth, go
about shipping your work. And I thought, shipping your work, because I think the post office.
Ship constantly. Skip meetings often. Skip them with impunity. Ship. So he's like,
he means just, finish what you can and move on. There's a story about Jerry Seinfeld, who he talks about, he's he's highly successful, wrote all those shows, just one of the most prolific, writers and comics and everything. And he shared one day that somebody asked him, why are you so successful? And he said, I just write. Every day I get up, I write. And you're an author, so I just write. I do the work every day, whether it's terrible, whether it's good, whether it's okay. And he said, through the discipline of doing the brilliance comes out. But see, most people, and myself included, we're not willing to ship it off and say, okay, move to the next. I did my best. I'll learn, because success only comes from learning. It's, we never fail. We just learn. So I don't know. I really appreciated him giving you permission to just be good enough and keep growing, because I truly believe that's where we get caught up. And then we use that as our excuse to not become better.
And I think that that's a great thing for us to end the show with, and to really encourage our listeners to stop thinking that, first of all, that it has to be perfect before you start, because we know that we've got to start before we're ready, because that's all these little experiences that we're going to have are going to make us better along the way. And then also that once we do it, we don't stop doing it because it's not perfect along the way. Like if you are going to hit those little road bumps. We talked about in last week's episode about, stay on the bus. Like if you stay on the journey, you're going to have ups and downs and everything, but stay on it. Yeah. Keep shipping the work, and it's going to get better. And I think that's really inspirational. And I want everyone that's listening or watching us on YouTube to, please believe that you deserve to have everything in life that you want. But it starts today. It's not something that's far out in the future. Think about what that